So welcome everyone. My name is Patrick Boo. I'm the portfolio manager for ABB Cybersecurity Services.
And I'm Ben Dickinson, the global product line leader for cybersecurity in ABB's energy industries business.
Today we want to talk about risk and how it relates to threats for the industrial system owner. And let's start with the definition of risk that we are using in ABB and that we're going to use throughout this video. Risk is a function of likelihood and consequence. So how likely is it that something will happen? And if that would happen, what would the consequence be? And the risk is coming from many things. Hundreds of thousands of new malware detected each day, a shortage of cybersecurity experts in the world, and a clear risk increase in the past 12 to 18 months. In ABB, we address risk by our people, processes, and technology. So Ben, help us understand this matrix that we have on the screen here.
Yeah, so risk is all about understanding both the likelihood that an attack is going to occur and also the consequence of how it's going to impact you as a business. So think about all the threat actors that are out there with both a motivation and a capability to target you as an organization. What we're going to do is create a measure of how likely and how impactful each type of cyber attack is going to be on you as an organization.
But we have different types of threats. So if we look at the first one, probable, give us a few examples.
So think about a probable attack. It might be a non-targeted attack, malicious software, viruses on your systems. It might be a hobbyist attacker, someone just trying out their new skills, or it could be an accidental attack on your system too.
All right, and if we take a possible one, some examples there?
So something that's quite likely to occur is a targeted attack by a cyber criminal to interrupt your operations and for financial gain.
And the improbable, something here that is unlikely to occur. What is an example of one of those threats?
So something less likely to happen, but nonetheless quite impactful on you as an organization, might be a nation state sponsored attack.
Yeah, but just because we put them here, it's probable, depending what industry you're on, these could be very much different, right?
Yeah, so have a think about if you're critical national infrastructure, there might be more probable attack from a nation state threat actor, but less likely to be successful. Or think about a chemicals company, you may be quite likely to be targeted by nation states for the reasons of industrial espionage. So to quantify your risk and carry out an effective assessment, what you're trying to do is create a measure in a matrix like this of the different threat scenarios, the different ways that different threat actors would successfully target your system, and get a good measure of how both likely the attack is to occur and what the consequences might be should the attack be successful.
Yeah, but the likelihood that you're under attack, we have 100%.
So I think we can safely say that the likelihood that your organization would be targeted is 100%. It's just a case of measuring what the impact of different types of cyber attack might be and how you can mitigate and respond to those attacks.
So just by having a system, you are always under attack, even if it's the mistakes from your own operators all the way to the nation states.
Yeah, so by having a business, having a system, you automatically become a target. There is value in targeting your system. It's a case of understanding what that impact might be, who's motivated to target you, and how are you going to protect your systems to prevent or limit the impact of a successful attack.
Yeah. Looking at this in a different way and the mitigations we can do to lower the risk. So we have the non-targeted threats on the left side going all the way up to nation states on the right side. Non-targeted threats, malware, ransomware, phishing attacks, such things. To effectively reduce the risk coming from this area, we recommend implementing security controls. Security updates, malware protection, have your backup, maybe have an asset inventory allow listing, perform some kind of checks with analytics on it. That will reduce the non-targeted threats by a large factor. To address the hobbyist hackers, we recommend adding maintenance to the security controls. Make them as effective as possible. That will make it harder for the hobbyist hacker to get access to the system and do harm. But it doesn't take away all the risk from the hobbyist hackers. To do a little bit more, we recommend training. Often forgotten about, but it's very, very powerful. Train all your people on what to do, what not to do, what to click on, what not to click on, and how to act to both reduce the risk of have an infection or being attacked, as well as limiting the impact of that attack. Again, now we only so far down. This is about the 85% risk reduction that we often talk about. To go further and do the professional hackers, you need a point solution, and that may vary very much for what your risks are, what you want to do, what industry, and so forth. A strong procedure and policy, hardening the system, and having monitoring, be it network or event monitoring. The last little bit is very, very hard to protect yourself against. And these are the advanced persistent threats. Very skilled hackers or nation states, they're in your system for a long period of time to get a foothold to do something later. And here, the only thing you can do is the monitoring and operations. Having people that constantly looking at what's going on and trying to find indications that these advanced persistent threats are in the system. This would reduce the risk as this curve shows here. When you have all these controls in place, don't forget about your architecture. Design your network in such a way that it in itself helps secure your system. And by doing that, in our case, we call it a reference architecture, you can lower your risk across the board quite substantially.
I think it's important that the design, implementation, and maintenance of security controls is an iterative process. Your risk landscape can change. So, for example, if new vulnerabilities are detected within your operating systems, then it's important that you quickly get those patches put in place. And similarly, once you back up your systems, within a few months' time, it'll be important that you implement new backups.
Yeah, cybersecurity is that journey that we talk about. You can't just forget about it. Let's look at a few examples of various attacks and how they fit in here. If we start on the left-hand side, non-targeted threats. Ben, tell us about this example we have here from Merck Pharmaceutical.
So this attack's quite significant in 2017 because of the amount of victims, over 200,000 victims from a single source of malicious software, and the impact costing some organizations upwards of hundreds of millions of dollars to recover from this type of attack. What we found is that basic measures like procedures, policies, system backups, and basic monitoring could significantly reduce the risk of this attack being successful and the impact that it may cause.
Yeah, and taking it up a step, the hobbyist hackers, an example of that would be the Oldsmar water treatment plant. Tell us a bit more.
So this attack was quite significant because of the potential impact of this type of attack. Not really that sophisticated attacker found unsecure direct remote access into operational systems, and the impact could be harmful to humans. Basic procedures and monitoring and implementation of a secure remote access system would reduce the likelihood that this attack would take place.
Taking up a step, professional hackers, an example of this is the Colonial Pipeline. So Ben, a new threat vector, tell us.
Yeah, so this was brand new last year. Ransomware as a service, a cyber criminal for financial gain leasing out this sophisticated software that they've developed to perhaps less sophisticated attackers, resulting in, as a result, more attacks taking place and huge impact on the industry.
So the risk reduction actions, anything different? Is there anything you could do to make this less likely to happen?
What we found is that the basics, the foundational controls like patching, system backups, malware protection and hardening, and also training individuals within the organization could have prevented this attack.
What I find super interesting with the Colonial Pipeline and got me thinking is the societal impact. Cybersecurity attacks, we think it happens to the company, to the industrial system owner, but it actually affects and sometimes ourselves. And I think the Colonial Pipeline was a good example of that, where a cyber attack led to people not be able to get gas or other things. Nation states. This is where it gets really hard to protect yourself against. Isn't that right, Ben?
Yeah, so this example is back in 2010, but that doesn't mean to say that these types of attacks don't take place more recently. This is just an example of the impact that can be caused by a nation-state threat actor. In this example, they're targeting critical infrastructure with sophisticated capability, difficult to detect, to shut down a nuclear facility.
Yeah, and we can imagine that a nuclear facility like this one had some cybersecurity in place, and even then the attack was successful.
Yeah, so this attack was successful even though it was air-gapped from external networks. This type of attack takes much more layers of security controls to be put in place. Most importantly, detection capability and recovery capability, the ability to respond and recover effectively from the detection of this type of malicious software.
You will be victim of cybersecurity at one point or another, because you talked about the likelihood being far from zero. So the question is, if you are, what is your last line of defense? And that is the recovery. Be able to quickly recover, and therefore reducing the risk by reducing that consequence.
Think about the nation state's motivation as well. In this case, it's building a capability to shut down a critical infrastructure site. The other reason a nation state might want to target organizations is industrial espionage, so stealing trade secrets for their own economies.
All right, let's look at a few examples to frame this and put this into a day-to-day conversation. Scenario one, we have a customer or a plant owner that is in denial. They operated for so many years without ever seeing anything. Their friends haven't seen anything. They obviously cannot be at risk, right? What do we? How do we talk to someone like this? Because it can't be true, can it?
I would start by explaining some of the changes that have taken place in the recent years. The number of successful attacks is on the rise year on year. We've got new concepts such as we've talked about, ransomware as a service. So what I would say is that looking historically at the number of successful attacks you've had as a business isn't a good measure of your current risk exposure.
One step up in the scenario. Scenario two, a customer that realizes the risk. He finally breaks through and said, all right, there is risk. I want to do something about it, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah, a couple of bits of information. I don't expect to achieve everything overnight. Formulate a plan. I would start with the basics, start with an assessment. So understand where your risk lies, where your priorities are, where you have risk exposure, and then also think about gaps against regulatory requirements and industry best practice. From there, you can think about a plan and implement the foundational controls. What we mean by foundational controls are controls like patching, malware protection, and system backups that we think every OT system should have in place and be maintained. And then we'd think about training. Every single person in your organization plays some sort of part in securing your organization from the threat of cyber attack. So whether it's cybersecurity awareness training or specific training for your cybersecurity expertise, and helping people understand the part that they play in securing your organization. And then lastly, think about your network architecture. Patrick talked about a secure reference architecture to build the security controls upon. So think about what your reference architecture is, and think about how you can start working towards modifying and upgrading your systems to work towards that reference.
Scenario 3. Now we have the customer that may have gone a bit too far. They want a fortress. Their leadership have said any stops to our production, especially one from cyber attack, is unacceptable. What do we say? Because this is not really easy to achieve, is it?
Yeah, I'd say 100% security is not possible, and it's not advisable either. If you try to implement too many cybersecurity controls, then it can affect the operability of your system. So it might take more effort, a lot more costs, and make you less viable as a business by focusing on implementing too many controls, which will eventually have less impact on risk mitigation.
We have a cost security level graph here. Quickly walk us through it, Ben, because it looks like that when you want to increase your security level, the cost is increasing exponentially.
Yeah, so on the x-axis that you see there, as we increase security level, our costs obviously go up. So we put more controls in place, and as a result, risk on the red line there will come down. And we find the optimal level is finding a balance between the right security level and using the right amount of costs to mitigate cybersecurity to an acceptable level according to the organization's risk appetite and regulatory requirements.
Yes. You may actually be forced to implement quite strong cybersecurity, but to your point, you will never ever hit the zero mark, right?
That's right. So you'll never mitigate your cyber risk to nothing, but what you can do is mitigate it to an acceptable level, and the risk that's left over, plan in place on how you're going to detect those attacks and respond effectively.
So we talked about risk and how to reduce it, and in ABB we have created a risk reduction roadmap. So this is our blueprint on how one can address risk and step by step reducing it. You can't go from zero to complete risk reduction in one step. You have to embark on this journey. Can you tell us the main steps to go through when you're reducing risk?
Yeah, so at ABB we break it down into 6 steps. Step 1, do an assessment. Assess your risk, i.e. the likelihood and impact of a cyber attack on your organization, and also assess the gaps against regulatory requirements on both your system security and your program security. What you do then with step 2 is think about a plan. So you take the output of those assessments to plan what security controls you need to put in place and where and when, and you can do prioritization effort. Once we have a plan, we can put that plan into place with step 3 by implementing the security controls, followed by step 4, which is the maintenance, maintaining those controls to make them effective or to keep them effective. Step 5 is building on those controls to make sure as an organization you have a detection capability, both to detect vulnerabilities within your system and detect malicious activity that might take place within your systems. The last step, step 6, is being able to monitor and respond effectively from any successful attacks within your system.
And of course, if you look at the implement, you don't have to implement all those things that we have there, but you should implement some of them, and they are in a specific order. Application allow listing may not be the best control to start with, so you start with your malware and so on. So that's our risk reduction roadmap. A great help to guide, and it will reduce the risk. Wrapping up, a few things we want to really leave you with. The threat environment is growing like we've never seen before.
Yeah, so the frequency of attacks on industrial control systems, the impact realized by these attacks is growing year on year. They're specifically targeting the energy sector, specifically targeting industrial control systems, and we need to start now in assessing our systems and implementing the right controls for protection.
And remember the component of risk, consequence. You need to know the consequence. If there's no consequence to an attack happening, you shouldn't do much. But if it's a huge consequence, you should probably invest a little bit more.
Have a think about how a cyber attack can have a consequence on you as an organization. How can it impact you as a business, whether financially, on safety, or environmental impact? Understand which systems are most critical to you as an organization.
Yeah. And the other component of risk is likelihood. And that's where you can get a lot of help reducing that likelihood, and ABB are there to help you with that.
Yeah, so once you know how a cyber attack can impact you as a business, i.e. what the consequence might be, then we can work with you to think about what controls need to be put in place to reduce both the likelihood of a cyber attack taking place and what the impact might be should it be successful.
So thank you very much for watching. And for more information about the cybersecurity roadmap, ABB's approach to cybersecurity, or any of our services, please visit our webpage at abb.com/cybersecurity/service. Thank you very much for watching.